Welcome to Investment Portfolios. So as we're wrapping up this week, I'm your online instructor, Diana Block, by the way. And as we're wrapping up this week, you do have a test, and it's cumulative. It goes back to some of the beginning material up through the end of the course. And so while we're reviewing, I want to kind of review the foundation of creating an investment portfolio for a client. And that involves creating an investment policy statement, or even for yourself, you should create an investment policy statement. And a written policy is going to help you to maintain a disciplined approach to your investing. And that's important when the market starts moving and you get distressed and there's emotions that might make you want to second guess your strategies. It's great to have a written policy that you can refer back to. A written policy is also going to encourage that you and your client communicate well, or if you're the client, it encourages you to communicate with your advisor or even with family members if you're just investing on your own. It creates a framework for you to be able to review what's important to you with your investment portfolio. So we're going to, as a summary, kind of wrap up all the steps involved in creating an investment policy statement. So the first step is to go ahead and establish some long-term goals and objectives. So for individual investors, your long-term goals are going to include standard things like retirement income, most likely. Sometimes there will be a future expenditure like a vacation home, maybe educational funding for their children, some other long-term financial need. But retirement is kind of standard what most people are saving for. And yet we have to recall when we're making these long-term goals and objectives that retirement income has to also account for inflation expectations and be able to generate enough income to maintain your quality of life throughout your retirement, which you don't know how long that'll be, but with advances in medicine, people are living a good long time, and so retirement could last just as long as your working career in some cases. So you want to go ahead and establish those long-term objectives and long-term goals. Then what we have to do is define our investment time horizon. You might have multiple investment objectives that we talked about in the last slide, like your kids' education and as well as your own retirement. And each of those might have different investment periods. So this should all be identified in your policy statement. Your time horizon is really important because it's going to affect your asset allocation as well as your risk profile. And so your investments may change over time as you get closer to the end of a specific horizon for one of your goals. So you want to define your time horizon for each of your different objectives. Then the next big task is to determine your risk profile. We know that investment markets are volatile, they're uncertain. It's going to be really important to establish an acceptable and realistic and appropriate amount of risk for your individual situation or the client's individual situation. There's a lot of different methods that can be used to evaluate risk. We talked about some of them in this course, and most of those methods are attempting to quantify the possibility that your expected returns or growth is going to be less than expected. And so a skilled financial advisor is going to be a lot of help to a client in this particular area for determining their risk profile. Okay, so now we want to establish an expected rate of return. In order to reach your objectives, whatever they've been determined to be, your portfolio is going to have to grow at some certain rate. And what you'll want to consider is what is the required rate of return on this plan that will generate those requirements. Now, your returns on your portfolio is going to be a direct result of its risk level. So that ties into the last step that we talked about. You have to set expectations that are going to be reasonable based on the level of risk that you are willing to accept in the previous step. So what you'll do is you're going to have to set criteria and have a periodic review of your results compare that to your benchmarks and your expectations. And a lot of times you'll have to make adjustments of your expected rates of return. So, but you need to establish that some reasonable and acceptable expectations. So once we've done that, what you're most likely going to do next is start developing some asset allocation guidelines. And I think it's an important step in writing down your asset allocation policy. It's important to do that because this is going to help you to guide your decisions regarding the portfolio or guide management's decisions for this portfolio. It's going to assist the financial advisor, if you have one, in the ongoing management of your assets. So your portfolio's asset classes should have a low correlation with each other so that we can provide those diversification benefits that are so important. Another thing that should be considered is the expected rate of return and the risk of each asset category as it relates to the portfolio as a whole. So you're going to consider things like liquidity, tax efficiency, and your rebalancing guidelines. All of that is part of the process that you'll go through to develop asset allocation guidelines that are appropriate for this particular portfolio. And so what I consider to be the last step is to actually document an investment methodology. And as we learned in this class, there's a variety of investment strategies that you could follow to implement an investment program. And you want to carefully evaluate the pros and cons of these different approaches and personalize these preferences in your policy statement and document it, that these are your specific choices of strategy. This is going to help guide you if you're the advisor, or if this is your personal portfolio, it will help your advisor to gauge market conditions as they change, and as there's new investments to consider, to help them to stay on point with your specific strategy in the future. So it's very important, I believe, to document a specific investment methodology. Not that it can't change later, but you will have to review what you've written and consider how you want to make changes to your strategy, and remind yourself really why you chose the strategy that you selected in the first place, so that you're not reacting emotionally too quickly sometimes. So in conclusion, I just think that one of the most important elements of a successful investment experience is that investment policy statement. This is just your written investment plan that allows either you or your advisor to have a written implementation and a review program so that they can manage your investments according to your wishes and expectations. And this is really similar to a business plan that a business might create. And we know that without a business plan, a business will have a very hard time succeeding. So this written policy statement is a critical first step towards successful investing. And so these are the steps that involved that I presented for you to create an investment policy statement. You're going to establish long-term goals, define your time horizons, and that may be individualized and multiple horizons based on the different goals that you set. Determine your risk profile. Based on that risk profile, establish an acceptable and reasonable rate of return. Develop your asset allocation guidelines, and then document your investment methodology. So that is a wrap for us. If you have any questions about this information or any of the activities required for week 6, be sure to send me an email. I'll be glad to talk with you. We can also discuss things in the discussion area for this week if you would like as well. Enjoy the rest of your week.